In a small town where everyone knew each other's names, there stood an old school building with faded walls and broken windows. It wasn't the best school, but for many families it was all they could afford. Among the people who worked there was a quiet man named Paul. He wasn't a teacher or an office worker. He was the janitor. Every morning before the sun rose, he arrived with his broom and mop, making sure the classrooms were clean and ready for the day. His hands were rough, his clothes always smelled faintly of cleaning liquid, but his heart was full of pride because he loved his work. More than anything, he loved that his daughter studied in the same school. His daughter, Lila, was a kind and shy girl of 15. She always sat in the back of the classroom, quietly doing her work and avoiding unnecessary attention. She wasn't the type to talk much. Most of her classmates didn't really notice her, and those who did only saw her as the janitor's daughter. The label stuck to her like glue. She could feel it in the way people looked at her, the whispers when her father walked past the hallway, the way some teachers spoke to her with fake smiles that hid silent judgment. Every afternoon, when school ended, Lila would wait near the back entrance for her father to finish his shift. She often helped him clean, picking up papers, wiping desks, and making sure no trash was left behind. They didn't talk much while working, but there was a warmth between them, a quiet understanding that didn't need many words. Sometimes Paul would hum softly while mopping the floor, and Lila would smile, feeling safe and loved. But the students didn't see that side of her life. To them, she was invisible, or worse, a target for jokes. It wasn't unusual for a few students to whisper things like, "Her dad probably cleans our classroom," or "Maybe she'll be a janitor too." She heard every word but pretended not to. She'd learned to smile through the pain, though inside it hurt deeply. One chilly morning, something happened that changed everything. The music teacher, Mrs. Grant, had arranged a small class activity for her students. The idea was simple. Everyone had to come forward and try an instrument, even if they didn't know how to play. It was supposed to be a fun, light-hearted session. The students were excited. The room buzzed with laughter and chatter as they took turns playing the guitar, piano, and drums. When it was almost over, Mrs. Grant looked around the room, her eyes landing on Lila. "Lila," she said with a playful tone, "you've been so quiet today. How about you try something too?" Lila froze in her seat. She wasn't expecting to be called. "Oh, I'd rather not," she said softly, shaking her head. But some students started giggling. "Come on, Miss Grant," one boy shouted. "Let her play the violin." "That'll be fun." The room erupted in laughter. It wasn't real laughter. It was the kind that burns your skin, the kind that comes from mockery. Mrs. Grant smiled awkwardly, unsure whether to stop them or go along with it. "Well," she said, holding up the school's old violin, "maybe Lila can give us a note or two." The class cheered in amusement. Lila's face turned red. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor and never come back. She could feel every pair of eyes staring at her, some curious, some cruel. Mrs. Grant's voice softened. "It's just for fun, dear. Don't be shy." Slowly, Lila stood up and walked toward the front of the class. Her hands trembled as she took the violin. It was old and dusty, one of those instruments nobody really used. She had held a violin before, but only her own broken one at home. Still, her fingers knew how to hold it properly, even if she pretended not to. "Look, she's serious about it," a student whispered loudly, earning more giggles. Lila's throat tightened. Her teacher didn't say anything. She just watched, waiting for the joke to end. Lila looked down at the violin, then at the bow. She thought about her father for a moment, about how hard he worked every single day, about how he always told her, "People will laugh until they have no reason to." Her palms were sweaty. The wooden floor creaked under her shoes. She wanted to cry, but she refused to give them that satisfaction. So she lifted the violin, her small hands finding the right position. The class went quiet, waiting for something funny to happen. At that moment, a memory flashed in her mind. Her father, sitting on their tiny balcony, smiling as he watched her practice. He never knew much about music, but he always said, "When you play, even the walls listen." That thought gave her courage. But she didn't play yet. She simply stood there, looking down, feeling the pressure of everyone's expectations. Mrs. Grant cleared her throat. "It's all right, Lila. Just one note and you can sit down." Lila nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. Her fingers gently touched the strings, feeling their roughness. For a second, she forgot where she was. She imagined herself back home, where it was quiet, where there were no mocking eyes, no fake smiles, only the soft hum of her father cleaning in the next room. That memory gave her peace. She took a deep breath, her bow hovering above the strings. But before she could play, a group of students at the back started whispering again, making noises, mimicking violin sounds. The sound of fake violins filled the room, followed by laughter. Lila froze again. The teacher frowned but didn't say much. "All right, class, let's behave," she said half-heartedly, though her own lips curved in a small smirk. It wasn't cruel, just careless. But to Lila, it felt like the world was laughing at her. She lowered the violin. "I can't," she whispered, her voice shaking. Mrs. Grant sighed. "It's okay, dear. Maybe next time." She reached out to take the violin back, but Lila hesitated. Her fingers gripped it tighter. Something inside her whispered not to stop. Not this time. For once, she wanted to stand for herself, for her father. She looked at Mrs. Grant and said softly, "Can I try one more time?" The teacher blinked, a bit surprised. "Of course," she replied, handing her back the bow. The room went quiet again, though the mocking smiles still lingered. Lila lifted the violin once more, her body trembling, but her heart somehow was still. Outside the window, the wind blew gently through the trees. A paper flew off a desk. Everything seemed to slow down. Lila took another deep breath, and though her bow didn't move yet, her mind filled with music. The kind she had played late at night when her father was too tired to stay awake. Music that no one had ever heard. The silence in the classroom grew heavy, as if the air itself was waiting. A few students exchanged glances, rolling their eyes, thinking she'd embarrass herself again. But Lila wasn't hearing them anymore. She had gone somewhere far away, into her world where only she and the violin existed. As she stood there, the memory of all the laughter, the whispers, the hurt began to fade. All that remained was her father's voice in her head, calm and loving. "Don't let them tell you who you are. Let your heart do it for you." She looked up slightly, eyes shining but determined. The bow touched the strings lightly, though she didn't play yet. The moment before the first sound, that was when something changed in her. A quiet fire lit inside, stronger than the fear she had carried for years. She wasn't going to be the janitor's daughter who stayed silent anymore. She was going to be someone they would never forget. The teacher, sensing something shift, stopped speaking. The students grew still, some out of boredom, some out of curiosity. No one knew that this was the moment before everything in Lila's life would begin to change. The violin rested against her shoulder, the bow poised above the strings. Her heartbeat matched the rhythm of her breath. The joke had turned into something else, something even the teachers couldn't explain. And though the sound hadn't yet come, everyone in the room could feel that when it did, it wouldn't be what they expected. In that silent classroom, filled with quiet anticipation and faint dust floating in the sunlight, a janitor's daughter prepared to turn mockery into music. When Lila returned home that day, the laughter from her classmates still echoed in her ears. She kept replaying the moment again and again, the looks on their faces, the whispers, the forced smiles. She walked beside her father quietly, trying her best to hide the sadness in her eyes. Paul noticed it right away. He always did. Even when she didn't say anything, he could read the heaviness in her silence. As they reached their small apartment, he asked softly, "Tough day?" Lila hesitated, then nodded. "They laughed at me again, Dad. The teacher asked me to play the violin as a joke." Her voice cracked slightly. Everyone thought it was funny. Paul stopped in the hallway and looked at her. His eyes were kind, but there was pain in them too. Not for himself, but for his daughter. "People laugh when they don't understand," he said after a long pause. "They think making fun of someone makes them bigger. But it doesn't, it just shows how small their hearts are." Lila looked up at him, tears filling her eyes. "I wanted to play, Dad, I really did. But I was too scared. I just froze." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't need to prove anything to them, Lila. You just have to believe in yourself. That's what matters." They entered their small home. It was simple but clean and cozy, thanks to Paul's hard work. On one corner of the living room sat an old violin, patched together with glue and tape. Its color had faded, but to Lila, it was the most precious thing she owned. She walked toward it, running her fingers gently across its surface. I wish they could see what I can really do, she whispered. Paul smiled and said, one day they will. But until then, you keep playing for yourself. That night after dinner, Lila picked up the violin and started to play. The sound wasn't perfect, but it was full of feeling. Her small room filled with soft, trembling notes that rose and fell like whispers of her heart. She closed her eyes and let the music speak for her. Paul sat nearby, pretending to read a newspaper, though his attention was all on her. He smiled quietly, feeling proud. Every note she played carried pieces of her pain, her hope, and her courage. As the days passed, Lila's confidence began to grow, but only when she was alone. At school, she stayed quiet as always. The laughter and jokes had faded, but the whispers hadn't. She didn't want to give anyone a reason to laugh again. Still, every night after her homework and her father's long shift, she would take out the violin and practice. Sometimes she would play so softly that even the walls seemed to listen. One afternoon, Paul came home carrying a small black case. "What's that?" Lila asked curiously. He smiled and opened it, revealing a set of new violin strings and a bow. "A gift," he said simply. They were throwing them away at the music store. The owner said they were old stock, but they're still good. Lila's eyes widened. "For me?" "For my little musician," he said proudly. She hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Dad." That night she replaced the old strings and started to play again. The new strings made her violin sound alive, rich and full. She played until her fingers hurt, but she didn't care. Music was her escape, her safe place where no one could laugh at her. Weeks passed, and Lila's playing improved faster than she ever imagined. Her father would often hum along while sweeping the floor, pretending to be her audience. It became their little ritual, a moment of joy in a life that wasn't always kind. One evening, as Lila was practicing, there was a knock on their door. It was Mrs. Grant, the music teacher. Paul opened the door, surprised. "Good evening," she said with a polite smile. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but I was walking by and thought I heard someone playing the violin." Lila froze in her spot. Her heart jumped into her throat. She didn't expect her teacher to ever hear her play. "Yes, that's my daughter," Paul said proudly. "She loves to play." Mrs. Grant's eyes widened. "Your daughter? That's incredible. I thought I was hearing a recording." She stepped inside as Lila shyly lowered the violin. "Lila, I didn't know you could play like that." Lila looked down, nervous. "I've been learning on my own," she said softly. Mrs. Grant's expression changed. For the first time, there was genuine respect in her eyes. "You're very talented, dear. You should join the school music program. We could use someone like you." Paul looked at his daughter, waiting for her answer. Lila hesitated. The idea scared her, going back into the same classroom where everyone had laughed. But something inside her whispered that maybe this was her chance to change how they saw her. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. After the teacher left, Paul turned to her and smiled. "You see? I told you. People will hear you when it's time." Lila nodded, though her heart was full of mixed feelings, fear, excitement, hope. The next morning at school, Mrs. Grant announced that there would be an audition for the upcoming school concert. "Anyone who wants to perform can sign up," she said cheerfully. "It's your chance to show your talent." Lila sat at her desk, staring at the paper. She could already hear the whispers from her classmates. "She's not really going to sign up, is she?" one of them murmured. Another laughed. "What's she going to play, the broom?" Lila clenched her pencil. Her stomach twisted, but she didn't let go. Slowly, she walked to the teacher's desk and wrote her name on the list. The room went quiet. Everyone stared. Mrs. Grant smiled faintly. "Good for you, Lila," she said. After school, she told her father about it. "You did the right thing," he said, his eyes shining. "Now practice like you've never practiced before." That evening, Lila practiced until her arms ached. She played every song she knew, trying to perfect each note. Paul listened from the kitchen, quietly cheering her on. Sometimes he would tap his foot to the rhythm, pretending to be an orchestra conductor. They laughed together, filling their tiny home with warmth. As the audition day approached, Lila grew more nervous. The thought of standing in front of everyone made her stomach turn. She remembered the last time she stood before them, the laughter, the whispers. But she also remembered the sound of her own music at home, and the way her father's eyes lit up when she played. That memory gave her courage. The night before the audition, Paul cleaned her violin carefully and polished the bow. "It's ready," he said proudly. "Now it's your turn." Lila smiled, hugging him tightly. The next morning, the school hall was buzzing with noise. Students practiced their instruments, tuning guitars and testing microphones. Lila stood in the corner, holding her violin close to her chest. Her palms were sweaty and her heart raced. When Mrs. Grant called her name, she felt the same fear she had felt that day in class. But this time, she was ready. She walked onto the stage, the lights shining in her eyes. The students murmured, some curious, some mocking. Paul had managed to take the morning off and stood quietly at the back of the hall. When Lila spotted him, she smiled. That was all the strength she needed. She placed the violin under her chin, lifted the bow, and closed her eyes. The hall fell silent. Then she began to play. The first note floated through the air, pure and gentle. Then came another and another, forming a melody that wrapped around the room like a soft blanket. Her fingers moved with confidence, her heart leading every sound. The same students who once laughed now sat still, their faces changing from amusement to awe. Mrs. Grant covered her mouth in surprise. She had expected something simple, maybe a few rough notes, but what she heard was something deep, emotional, and beautiful. Every note seemed to tell a story, of struggle, of love, of hope. When Lila finished, the room stayed silent for a few seconds. Then, one by one, hands began to clap. Soon the entire hall filled with applause. Paul wiped a tear from his eye, trying to hide it. His little girl had done it. Lila looked up, her cheeks flushed but her eyes shining with joy. She bowed slightly, then looked at her father. He smiled proudly, mouthing the words, "I told you so." That day, something changed. Not just for Lila, but for everyone who had once laughed at her. The janitor's daughter was no longer invisible. She had found her voice, and it was louder than any whisper of mockery could ever be. When she walked home that evening, the world felt different. The same streets, the same buildings, but everything looked brighter. Her father walked beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "You see," he said softly, "you didn't need to prove them wrong. You just needed to show them who you are." Lila smiled, her heart full. She looked up at the sky, feeling lighter than ever before. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she believed it could be something beautiful. After the audition, everything in Lila's life began to feel different. The same students who once laughed at her now whispered her name in awe. Some of them even came up to her, pretending to be friendly, saying things like, "Hey, that was amazing," or "You never told us you could play like that." But Lila didn't mind their sudden change of tone. She wasn't angry or proud. She was just relieved that for the first time people had seen her for who she really was. Not the janitor's daughter, not the quiet girl in the back row, but someone who had something beautiful to share. At home, Paul couldn't stop smiling. Every person he met at school the next day had something good to say about his daughter. "You must be proud," they told him, and his eyes would shine as he replied, "More than you can imagine." For years, people had walked past him without a second glance, but now they looked at him differently, and though he never cared about what others thought of him, it warmed his heart to see that his daughter's talent was finally being recognized. That night, Lila came home to find a small cake on the table. It was simple, bought from a nearby bakery with a single candle on top. "What's this?" she asked with a laugh. Paul smiled. "A celebration. For your first standing ovation." Lila blushed. "Dad, you didn't have to." "I wanted to," he said gently. "You made everyone listen. You made me proud." She hugged him tightly, tears filling her eyes. "Thank you, Dad, for never giving up on me." From that day forward, Lila's name started to spread around the school. The music teacher, Mrs. Grant, began to take a special interest in her. She gave her extra time in the music room, helped her with more difficult pieces, and encouraged her to join competitions. Lila was hesitant at first. She wasn't used to attention, but something inside her had changed. For the first time, she believed she could belong on that stage. After classes, she often stayed behind to practice. Sometimes the empty hallways echoed with her music, soft and pure. Students passing by would stop to listen. Even teachers would pause outside the door, drawn by the emotion in her playing. It was as if her violin spoke a language that everyone understood, one of struggle, hope, and love. But not everyone was happy about her sudden success. A few students couldn't stand seeing the girl they once mocked becoming admired by everyone. They whispered behind her back, saying she was just lucky, that Mrs. Grant was favoring her. Some even said she was only getting attention because her story made people feel sorry for her. Lila heard those words, and though they hurt, she didn't let them break her. She had faced worse before. One afternoon, while practicing in the empty classroom, Mrs. Grant walked in with a letter. "Lila, I have some news," she said with a smile. "There's a regional music competition next month. I think you should enter." Lila looked surprised. "Me? But I've never been in any competition before." Mrs. Grant nodded. "That's true, but talent like yours deserves to be seen. This could open doors for you, maybe even a scholarship." Lila's heart raced. A scholarship. The word sounded like a dream. Her father had always struggled to pay her school fees, often working extra hours. If she could earn something through her music, it would mean the world to both of them. Still, the thought of performing in front of strangers terrified her. "I don't know if I'm ready," she said softly. Mrs. Grant smiled kindly. "You're more ready than you think. I'll help you prepare." That night, Lila told her father about the competition. Paul's face lit up instantly. "A competition? That's amazing. You should do it, Lila. I know you can win." She smiled nervously. "It's a big event, Dad. There'll be judges and everything." "What if I mess up?" Paul shook his head. "You won't. You've worked hard for this. Remember what I always tell you. When you play with your heart, people will listen." Over the next few weeks, Lila practiced harder than ever. Every evening, their small home filled with music. The notes weren't just sounds. They carried her memories, her struggles, her dreams. Paul would sit on the couch, closing his eyes, listening quietly. Sometimes he would whisper, "That's my girl," under his breath. As the competition day drew closer, Mrs. Grant arranged for Lila to play on the school stage for practice. "You need to get used to performing in front of people," she said. So a few students and teachers were invited to watch her rehearse. Lila stood on stage, her violin trembling slightly in her hands. She could feel all the old nerves returning, but then she saw her father at the back of the hall, mopping the floor as usual. He gave her a small nod and a smile. That simple gesture was all she needed. She began to play. The sound filled the room, gentle at first, then powerful. Her fingers moved with precision and grace. When she finished, there was silence for a moment, then applause. The principal, who had come to watch, turned to Mrs. Grant and said, "She's extraordinary." Word spread quickly. Soon everyone at school was talking about how Lila was going to represent them at the regional competition. Posters were put up in the hallway with her name on them. Some students who once teased her now wished her luck in the corridors. It felt strange, but also nice. Finally, the day of the competition arrived. The event was held in a large auditorium in the city. Paul and Lila took an early bus, carrying her violin carefully in its case. She wore a simple dress, and her father had polished his shoes until they almost shined. As they entered the hall, Lila looked around nervously at the other contestants. They were all dressed in fancy clothes, holding expensive instruments. Some had professional coaches with them. Paul noticed her nervousness. "Don't look at them," he whispered. "Just remember why you're here. Play for yourself. Play for us." When it was finally her turn, Lila walked onto the stage. The bright lights made her blink. She could feel hundreds of eyes watching her. Her heart pounded and her fingers felt stiff. She took a deep breath and thought of her father waiting backstage, smiling like he always did. Then she began to play. The first few notes were shaky, but then her hands found their rhythm. The melody grew stronger, flowing through the hall. People stopped moving. Some leaned forward, completely drawn in. Every note she played carried a story. Her father's long nights at work, her own lonely days at school, the laughter that once humiliated her, and the courage that helped her rise again. When she finished, there was a moment of pure silence. Then the audience erupted into applause. Some even stood up, clapping loudly. Tears filled her eyes as she bowed slightly, her heart full of relief and joy. Backstage, her father was already wiping his eyes, his chest swelling with pride. Later that evening, when the judges announced the results, Lila didn't win first place. She came second. But that didn't matter. To her and her father, it felt like victory. As she walked off stage, one of the judges came up to her and said, "You have a rare gift. Keep playing. You'll go far." Those words stayed with her. On the bus ride home, she rested her head on her father's shoulder. "I didn't win," she said softly. Paul smiled. "You won something better. You made people listen, Lila. You made them feel something. That's what music is for." She smiled, closing her eyes, feeling safe and content. The next day at school, everyone congratulated her. Even those who had never spoken to her before stopped by to say, "Well done." Mrs. Grant announced her success during assembly, and the whole hall clapped. The principal praised her for bringing honor to the school. For the first time, Lila didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like she belonged. That evening, as Paul finished his shift, he passed by the notice board and saw a photo of Lila pinned at the top, with the words "Second Place Regional Violin Competition." He stood there for a long time, smiling proudly. One of the teachers walking by said, "You must be very proud of her." He turned, his eyes warm. "I always have been," he said simply. When he came home, Lila was already practicing again. The sound of her violin filled the air, soft and full of joy. Paul leaned against the doorframe, watching her. He thought of all the years they had struggled, all the times she had been hurt and how far she had come. She noticed him watching and smiled. "You're not tired of hearing me play yet?" He chuckled. "Never." And as the night went on, the music continued, and not for trophies or applause, but for love. The love between a father who believed in his daughter and a girl who turned pain into melody. Their small apartment might not have had much, but it was filled with something priceless: hope, courage, and the sound of dreams coming true. After the regional competition, Lila returned to her school with a new confidence that seemed to radiate from her every movement. The whispers of doubt that had followed her for years began to fade, replaced by admiration and curiosity. Some students who had once laughed at her were now eager to hear her play, and even the teachers treated her differently. But Lila didn't let it go to her head. She remained the same humble, quiet girl who loved music with all her heart. She knew the applause was fleeting, but the music inside her would never leave. One day during music class, Mrs. Grant made a surprising announcement. "The school has been invited to perform at a citywide cultural festival," she said, her eyes sparkling.
"And I would like Lila to play a solo piece during the event."
"This is a big opportunity, and I hope she agrees." Lila felt a mixture of excitement and fear. The thought of performing on a bigger stage in front of strangers and perhaps critics made her stomach twist. But she remembered her father's words. "When you play with your heart, people will listen." That thought gave her courage. When she told her father about the opportunity, his face lit up with pride. "You have to do it, Lila. This is your moment to shine. I'll be right there, cheering for you every step of the way." In the weeks leading up to the festival, Lila practiced harder than ever. Every day after school, she would stay behind to work on her pieces, perfecting each note, each bow stroke. Paul often sat nearby, quietly sweeping the floor, sometimes tapping his foot to the rhythm of her music. They didn't need to speak. The music itself was a language that connected them. The day before the festival, Mrs. Grant arranged a rehearsal in the auditorium where the performance would take place. The stage was massive compared to the school hall she was used to, with bright lights and high ceilings that made her feel small. As she walked onto the stage, she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She closed her eyes for a moment, imagining her father's calm smile, and let that give her strength. When she began to play, the sound of her violin filled the empty auditorium. The notes echoed off the walls, carrying emotion and story with each movement. For a moment, Lila forgot about the audience, the stage, and even her fear. She was back in her small apartment, playing for the love of music alone. The beauty of her own sound carried through the hall, as if the space itself had stopped to listen. The next day, they traveled to the city for the festival. Lila was nervous, clutching her violin case tightly. The streets were crowded, full of people moving quickly in every direction. She kept her eyes on the sidewalk ahead, trying not to let the chaos overwhelm her. Paul walked beside her, steady and calm, guiding her with gentle encouragement. When they arrived at the festival venue, Lila's breath caught. The auditorium was packed with people, the stage bright with lights, and the hum of excitement filled the air. Contestants from other schools tuned their instruments, and volunteers moved quickly backstage. Lila felt a surge of fear. What if she made a mistake? What if the audience didn't like her music? Paul noticed her tension. "Look at me, Lila," he said softly. She lifted her eyes to his, and he gave her a reassuring smile. "You've practiced for this. You know what to do. Just play from your heart and everything else will fall into place." The moment finally came. Lila walked onto the stage, the violin under her chin, and took a deep breath. The audience quieted in anticipation. She felt the bright lights on her face, the countless eyes staring at her. For a second, fear threatened to overwhelm her. But then she heard the faint memory of her father's voice. "Don't let them tell you who you are. Let your heart do it for you." She lifted the bow and began to play. The first notes were soft, delicate, almost like whispers of a story untold. Then the music grew, filling the auditorium with a melody that was both powerful and gentle. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, bringing the violin to life. Each note carried emotion, years of struggle, moments of doubt, the quiet love between her and her father. The audience was captivated. Some leaned forward, unable to tear their eyes away. Even the judges seemed entranced, listening intently to the music that spoke beyond words. Lila closed her eyes, feeling the music flow through her, lifting her fears and turning them into beauty. She imagined herself standing back in her apartment, her father listening quietly as she played. That thought grounded her. Every note she played was a reflection of her journey, of the laughter she had endured, the support she had received, and the determination that had brought her here. As she reached the climax of her piece, the hall seemed to vibrate with the emotion of her music. The audience was silent, hanging on every note until she finished with a final lingering sound that floated through the room like a breath of wind. There was a moment of complete silence, the kind that feels heavy with awe and emotion. Then the hall erupted in applause. People stood clapping, cheering, some even wiping tears from their eyes. Lila opened her eyes, stunned by the reaction. She had expected applause, but not this overwhelming response. Backstage, Paul was clapping the loudest, tears streaming down his cheeks. He had never been prouder. Lila walked off the stage, still trembling, and found him waiting with open arms. She hugged him tightly, feeling safe and loved, and whispered, "I did it, Dad." "You did," he replied softly, holding her close. "And you made them all listen." The rest of the festival passed in a blur. Lila watched other performers, listened to judges' feedback, and took in the energy of the event. She didn't win first place. That honor went to another talented musician, but she didn't feel disappointed. She had achieved something far more important. She had transformed fear and mockery into music that moved people, and she had proven to herself that she belonged on that stage. When they returned home, Lila was exhausted but happy. She placed her violin carefully on its stand and sat beside her father. "Do you think people will ever forget that day?" she asked. Paul shook his head, smiling. "They might forget the details, but they will remember how it felt. And that's what matters." Lila nodded, feeling the truth of his words deep in her heart. She realized that music was not just about applause or recognition. It was about connection, about sharing a part of yourself that could touch others in ways words never could. And she had done that not for anyone else, but for herself, and for the man who had always believed in her. In the days that followed, life at school began to return to a new kind of normal. Students greeted her with respect, teachers encouraged her, and even those who had once mocked her treated her differently. Lila noticed the change but didn't let it define her. She continued to play, to practice, to grow. Her music had become a part of who she was, a voice that could speak even in silence, a story told through strings and bow. Her father continued his work at the school, proud and quietly watching his daughter flourish. He knew that life would not always be easy, that there would be challenges ahead, but he also knew that Lila had discovered something powerful inside her, a strength, a talent, and a courage that would carry her through anything. One evening, as they sat together in their small apartment, Lila began to play again. This time she played without fear, without expectation, simply for the joy of the music. Paul sat nearby listening, his heart full. The notes floated through the room, soft and beautiful, telling a story of love, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a father and his daughter. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. The world outside could wait. The laughter, the doubts, the mockery, all of it had been transformed into something meaningful, something lasting. Lila had found her voice, and it would never be silenced again. After the citywide festival, Lila's life began to change in ways she never expected. The recognition she had received brought her confidence, but also new challenges. Some students tried to befriend her out of genuine curiosity, while others were jealous of her growing reputation. Lila learned to navigate these new dynamics carefully. keeping her focus on her music and her father, who remained her steadfast support. Mrs. Grant continued to guide her, encouraging her to apply for music workshops and summer programs. "Your talent deserves more than local recognition," she told Lila. "You have the potential to go far, and I want to help you get there." Lila felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Opportunities like these were expensive, and her father had always struggled to make ends meet. But Paul, as usual, found a way to reassure her. "We'll find a way," he said. "You've come this far with courage, and we'll keep moving forward together." One day, a letter arrived at their small apartment. Lila tore it open to find an invitation to a prestigious music workshop in the city, where students from all over the country would learn from professional violinists. Her heart raced. This was the chance she had dreamed of, but it was also intimidating. She had never left her small town alone, and the thought of being in a new place surrounded by talented musicians was both thrilling and frightening. Paul noticed her hesitation. "I know it feels scary," he said softly, "but remember, you're capable. You've faced challenges before, and you've come out stronger every time. This is just another step." With her father's encouragement, Lila decided to attend the workshop. She spent the weeks leading up to it practicing tirelessly, perfecting every piece she would play and preparing herself mentally for the experience. She felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety, but she knew that this opportunity could shape her future. The morning of her departure arrived, and Paul walked with her to the bus station. He carried her violin case carefully, as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. "Remember," he said, kneeling to her level, "play with your heart. People will listen, and they will feel what you feel. That is the power of your music." Lila hugged him tightly, feeling both nervous and excited. "I'll make you proud, Dad," she whispered. "I already am," he replied with a smile, wiping a tear from his cheek. The bus ride was long, and Lila spent most of the time staring out the window, watching the landscape change from familiar streets to open fields and then to the city skyline. The workshop was held in a large modern building with bright lights and spacious practice rooms. Lila was awed by the number of young musicians gathered there, each carrying their instruments with pride and purpose. The energy was electric, filled with excitement and determination. During the first day, Lila attended several classes and practice sessions. She was nervous at first, hesitant to speak or play in front of the other students, but gradually she began to find her footing. When she performed in front of the group, her music was met with admiration and encouragement. The professional violinists provided constructive feedback, praising her technique and the emotion she conveyed through her playing. Lila felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. For the first time, she was surrounded by people who understood her passion and respected her dedication. Despite her growing confidence, there were moments when doubt crept in. Some of the other students were incredibly talented, and Lila occasionally felt like she didn't belong among them. She would retreat to a quiet corner with her violin, practicing alone until she regained her focus. Paul's words echoed in her mind. "You've faced challenges before. You are stronger than you think." During one evening practice session, a young instructor approached her. "You have a rare gift," he said. "The way you play tells a story. Keep developing your voice. Don't be afraid to share it." Lila nodded, feeling a surge of motivation. She realized that this workshop wasn't just about learning technique. It was about discovering herself as a musician and as a person. Each day brought new lessons, not only in music but in confidence, resilience, and self-expression. By the end of the week, the students were preparing for a final performance, where they would play solo pieces for an audience of parents, instructors, and fellow students. Lila's nerves returned, but this time they were tempered by experience and preparation. She had faced mockery, doubt, and fear before, and she had emerged stronger each time. On the day of the performance, Lila stepped onto the stage, her violin under her chin. The lights were bright and the audience was large. She felt her heart race, but she focused on her breathing and the music inside her. The first notes flowed from her instrument, soft and delicate, then building into a powerful, emotional melody that filled the auditorium. The audience was captivated, listening intently as her story unfolded through her music. When she finished, the applause was overwhelming. Lila smiled, tears of relief and joy streaming down her face. She had not only performed well, but she had shared a part of herself that few people had ever heard. Backstage, she received praise from instructors and fellow students alike, their admiration reinforcing the confidence she had been building over the years. After the workshop, Lila returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. She had grown not only as a musician but as a person. Her father was waiting for her, beaming with pride. "I knew you could do it," he said. "Did you feel it? The music you played came from here," he tapped his chest. "Not just your fingers." Lila nodded, hugging him tightly. "I felt it, Dad, I really did. And I want to keep playing, keep learning, keep growing." In the days that followed, Lila shared her experiences with her classmates and teachers. The same students who had once laughed at her now looked up to her, inspired by her journey and her dedication. She continued to practice diligently, always striving to improve, but she never lost sight of the joy that music brought her. Paul continued to support her every step of the way, proud of her achievements and the resilience she had shown. Together they reflected on how far they had come, from a small apartment practicing on a patched-up violin, to performing on stages that had once seemed unreachable. Lila's journey was a testament to the power of determination, the love of a supportive parent, and the belief that true talent, when nurtured, can overcome any obstacle. Lila's story began to inspire others in her community as well. Younger students who had once felt invisible or discouraged saw in her a role model, someone who had faced ridicule and fear, but had persisted with courage and passion. Teachers and parents alike recognized the value of encouragement and support, realizing how a little belief could help a child unlock their potential. As Lila continued to grow as a musician, she never forgot the lessons she had learned. That talent alone was not enough. That perseverance, heart, and the support of loved ones were just as important. Every note she played carried with it the echoes of her journey, the struggles she had overcome, and the hope she wanted to share with the world. And through it all, her father remained her anchor, proud and unwavering, always reminding her that her music came from a place of truth, love, and resilience. The auditorium was packed that evening, but one seat near the back stood out. A man in an old uniform sat quietly, holding a small bouquet of flowers. His hands were rough, worn from years of hard work, but his eyes were soft and full of pride. It was her father, waiting to see his daughter perform, not as the janitor's daughter this time, but as the star of the night. As the lights dimmed, the crowd went silent. Then the curtains opened and she stepped onto the stage. She looked calm, almost glowing under the soft yellow lights. Her simple white dress swayed slightly as she walked to the center, carrying the same violin her mother once owned. The audience had come from everywhere. Teachers, students, neighbors, even people from the music academy who had heard about her story. Everyone waited for her to play. She took a deep breath, lifted her bow, and began. The first note was gentle, like a whisper. Then came the melody, smooth and full of emotion. The sound filled the hall, wrapping around every person in the audience. Some closed their eyes, others just watched in silence. The music didn't need words. It spoke of years of hard work, quiet tears, and endless faith. As she played, she thought of her father cleaning empty classrooms, humming softly to himself. She thought of all those days she practiced in secret, the tiny room echoing with mistakes and hope. Every note carried a piece of that journey. Her hands moved with confidence now, her heart guiding each stroke of the bow. The song rose and fell like waves, carrying the audience with it. Halfway through, her eyes found her father in the crowd. He was sitting still, staring at her with trembling lips. Their eyes met for a moment, and she smiled. That small smile said everything. "Thank you for believing. Thank you for never giving up, even when everyone else did." His eyes glistened, but he quickly wiped them, pretending to fix his glasses. The final note lingered in the air, soft and pure. Then came silence. For a second, no one moved. Then the entire hall erupted into applause. People stood up, clapping, cheering, shouting her name. Some of the same teachers who once laughed at her now had tears in their eyes. The music teacher who had given her the violin as a joke stood near the stage, her face pale with both pride and guilt. She clapped harder than anyone else. The girl bowed her head, holding back tears. She didn't crave revenge or pride. All she felt was peace. The years of being ignored, mocked, and underestimated were behind her. Tonight, she wasn't just the janitor's daughter. She was a musician, an artist, someone who made people feel something real. After the performance, people crowded around her. Reporters asked for interviews, teachers offered apologies, and students begged for photos. But she looked for only one person, her father. He waited patiently near the door, still holding the bouquet, afraid to interrupt. When she finally reached him, she didn't say a word. She just wrapped her arms around him tightly. He whispered softly, "You did it." She smiled against his shoulder. We did it. That night, they walked home together. The moon was bright and the streets were quiet. She carried her violin carefully in one hand and he carried her flowers in the other. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel small or invisible. The same people who used to walk past him at school now recognized him as the man who raised the girl, who made everyone cry with her music. The days that followed were full of change. The story spread quickly. The janitor's daughter who silenced the school. A journalist wrote an article about her, and within weeks, a local music academy reached out with a scholarship offer. She couldn't believe it. She went to her father, holding the letter, trembling with excitement. "They want me to study music," she said, her voice shaking. He looked at the letter, then at her. "You should go," he said softly. "Your mother would be so proud." She hugged him tightly again, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'll make her proud. And you too." When she left for the city, it wasn't easy. Her father stood at the bus stop, waving until the bus turned the corner. He came back home to an empty house where her old violin practice notes still hung on the wall. Every night he'd sit on the same stool where he used to listen to her play, and he'd close his eyes, remembering her music. At the academy, she practiced harder than ever. She wasn't the richest student or the most confident one, but her passion was unmatched. The teachers noticed. Her style wasn't just skill, it was soul. Every time she performed, the audience felt something deep and honest. Within a year, she was performing in public recitals, and her name began to appear in local newspapers. But she never changed. She still called her father every night, asking how work was, if he was eating properly, and if he still kept her mother's violin polished. He would always say, "It's waiting for you." Years passed, and her dream slowly took shape. She performed in bigger halls, met famous musicians, and even got a chance to play in front of a large city audience. That night, as she stood behind the curtain, she felt a wave of nerves again, just like the first time at school. Then she remembered her father's voice telling her, "Play with your heart." So she did. When the concert ended, the crowd gave her a standing ovation. The director of the academy approached her and said, "You have something special. Not just talent, but truth." She smiled, because she knew where that truth came from love, from struggle, from cleaning classrooms at night while dreaming of music. She decided to dedicate her next performance to her father. It was a small hometown concert, back at the same school where everything began. The same hall, the same stage, but everything felt different now. When she walked in, students whispered in admiration, not mockery. Her father was already there, standing proudly near the entrance, wearing a new suit someone from the school had gifted him. Before she played, she spoke softly into the microphone. "This is for my father, who cleaned this school for years, and for my mother, whose music still lives through me. Thank you for never laughing when others did. This is our song." Then she began to play. The sound was deep and emotional, filling every corner of the hall. Teachers who had once doubted her wiped tears from their eyes. The janitor they once ignored was now the most respected man in the room. After the show, the principal walked up to her father and said, "You raised a wonderful daughter." The old man smiled humbly and said, "She raised me too. Life became brighter after that." She received invitations to play abroad, and her father traveled with her whenever he could. He would sit quietly in the audience, still wearing his old shoes, never drawing attention to himself. But everyone always knew who he was, the man whose daughter turned a cruel joke into a symphony. Even as her fame grew, she stayed humble. She visited her old school every year, talking to students about believing in themselves no matter where they came from. She told them about nights when she played in the dark, about how laughter doesn't define your worth, and about the power of kindness and patience. One day, she returned home early from a tour and found her father cleaning the porch just like he used to. She laughed, took the broom from him and said, "Let me help this time." He chuckled and said, "You already have." As the years went by, her music reached faraway places, but no matter how big the audience got, she always kept one tradition. Before every performance, she would whisper, "For you, Dad?" Then she'd touch the violin her mother once owned and walk onto the stage with the same calm smile. She never forgot the moment it all began, the laughter, the challenge, the first trembling note. What started as a cruel joke became the foundation of her strength. Those who mocked her had long since changed their hearts. Many of them later told her that her story inspired them to treat others with more kindness and respect. And so, the girl who was once invisible became a symbol of hope. Her music was more than sound. It was proof that dreams don't belong to the rich, the powerful, or the privileged. They belong to anyone brave enough to keep believing, even when the world laughs. In the final scene, she stands on a large stage in another country, thousands of people waiting in silence. She lifts her violin, the same one her mother played, the same one she practiced on in that dusty storage room years ago. She closes her eyes and begins to play, and somewhere deep inside she can still hear her father's quiet voice saying, "Play with your heart." And she does. Every note carries her journey. Every sound tells the story of a janitor's daughter who turned laughter into applause, and pain into music that would never be forgotten.